Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're tackling something massive. We're not just talking about another security incident. We're really digging into a foundational shift in the landscape of automated cybercrime. We are wading into something truly colossal. An event that didn't just expose credentials, it provided the fuel for what is really a systemic identity crisis. We're talking about the Synthient credential stuffing threat data.
That's the perfect way to frame it. When this data was finally integrated into services like Have I Been Pwned, it completely forced security professionals everywhere to redefine what a massive breach even means. Because this wasn't a single catastrophic failure from one company, not at all. This was the combination of years and years of data theft, of aggregation and curation by threat actors. It's a combo list on a scale we've just never seen, and it's now weaponized to fuel account takeover at a volume that is, frankly, staggering.
Okay, let's break this down for everyone listening, especially for our audience of security analysts and developers. Our mission today is, let's be clear, it's a technical mandate. This isn't a history lesson.
Exactly.
We're going to drill down into three core areas because this data set, we believe, demands an immediate and architectural response from every single organization.
First, we have to get our heads around the why, the systemic danger that the Synthient corpus actually poses. And that means understanding its raw scale and, more importantly, the terrifying implications of credential reuse, which is really the foundational weakness being exploited here.
And second,
We're going to define the how. We'll walk through the precise, step-by-step technical workflow that bots use in these huge distributed credential stuffing attacks. We'll get into the tooling, the evasion techniques, everything.
and finally, and this is the most important part, we deliver the mandate. Actionable defense. We will break down three immediate technical imperatives that organizations absolutely must implement right now to protect their application and identity layers from this exact type of threat.
And if your current defense relies mostly on, say, perimeter rules or just basic rate limiting or even simple two-factor authentication, this deep dive is going to fundamentally challenge your defense architecture.
All right, let's get started with the monumental scale that really defines this whole risk. The numbers tied to the Synthient data set are they're genuinely hard to wrap your head around. When Troy Hunt, the founder of HIBP, started talking about integrating this, he wasn't kidding about the difficulty or the scope. So what exactly are we looking at inside this record-breaking data set?
We are looking at a quantum leap. It's not just a step up. Synthient indexed 1.96 billion unique email addresses. And yeah, everyone just rounds it up to 2 billion.
Yeah.
And to pair that with 1.3 billion unique passwords.
1.3 billion.
And the critical part of that 1.3 billion is that these are the keys. These are the actual keys needed to unlock the accounts associated with those 2 billion emails.
2 billion email addresses. That is just a staggering percentage of the entire global internet population. But just processing that volume itself must have been a monumental task. Can you walk us through what Troy Hunt actually had to do with Azure Hyperscale just to manage this data without crashing his own service?
Yeah, and that's a really crucial technical detail here. Integrating this list wasn't like, a simple SQL upload. This data set is nearly 3 times larger than the previous record holder, which was the infamous collection #1.
3 times. Wow.
To handle that scale, HIBP had to completely max out its Azure SQL hyperscale infrastructure. We're talking running at 80 cores for almost 2 weeks straight. And this wasn't just about storage. It was about indexing, sanitizing the data, removing all the duplicates, normalizing the formats, all to make sure the service stayed responsive for everyone else while this massive integration was happening in the background.
It was a huge, expensive undertaking just to provide a public service.
An extremely expensive exercise, yes.
Yeah.
Purely to notify people about what threat actors were up to.
So what makes this list genuinely fresh ammunition for attackers? And not just, a rehash of old data dumps we've all seen before.
It's the novelty. That's the key. 625 million of those passwords were entirely new to HIBP's pound password service.
625 million.
Think about that for a second. These were credentials that were actively in use, out there in the wild, completely unknown to security researchers. And then suddenly, they're available in this curated, normalized, and very easily machine-readable list for any attacker to use.
And the verification process confirmed that, right? People were finding passwords they were currently using?
Cold reality. Subscribers found passwords they were actively using on multiple sites right now. This is not old dust. It's a massive, fresh stock of ammunition mixed in with all the historical data.
The founder of HIVB Ham had to put out a really clear warning about how these lists get misreported in the media. We should probably underscore that for our developer audience.
Oh, absolutely. That warning was critical for context. The source data showed this massive presence of Gmail addresses, 394 million unique emails to be exact. But the warning was emphatic. This is not a Gmail breach.
Right, because that's what everyone assumes.
Of course. Yeah. But it just reflects the dominance of Gmail as a person's primary online identity. The vast majority of these credentials were stolen either through malware on infected user machines, what we call stealer logs, or from totally unrelated, smaller breached services where people just reused their main Gmail address as their username.
So the data came from everywhere.
It spans 32 million different email domains. It's a collective failure of user hygiene and endpoint security. It is not a flaw in Google's core infrastructure.
So this brings us right to the core technical danger that this scale exposes. Credential reuse. Why does this one single behavior, password reuse, make this data the literal keys to the castle for attackers?
The foundational danger is, well, it's simple. Humans are fundamentally lazy when it comes to authentication. We just are. We pick passwords that are easy to remember, and then we reuse those memorable passwords across tons of different unrelated online services.
And attackers know this.
They don't just know it, they build their entire business model on it. They're not just looking for access to the one site where the password was stolen.
Right.
They understand that a credential stolen from some low-value target, say an old gaming forum, a retail account you forgot about, or just a heavily infected personal computer, that same password might instantly unlock your high-value accounts.
Your corporate email, your bank.
Exactly. Corporate email, banking, healthcare applications. The threat actor doesn't need to hack your high-security target. They just need to find the password you used there from some low-security breach somewhere else.
We saw an illustrative fact that really, it just drives home how pervasive this weakness is, even among people who really should know better.
Yeah, it's a very sobering statistic. Of HIBP's 5.9 million subscribers, and these are security-conscious people, they've actively signed up to be notified of breaches. 2.9 million of them, nearly half, had credentials exposed in this one data set.
Nearly half.
If even proactive users who are actively monitoring their security posture get compromised because some other site they used was breached, it just confirms that organizations cannot, absolutely cannot, rely on individual user hygiene to protect their perimeter.
The failure is architectural.
The architectural failure is assuming uniqueness of credentials. And the data feeding this threat comes from two main streams: stealer logs, which are keylog and cookie dumps from malware, and then the curated credential stuffing lists, which are aggregated from all these prior database dumps and breaches.
Okay, so if 2 billion credentials are the supply, let's talk about the demand side. Shifting gears a bit to the financial model, why are companies losing millions? We saw estimates of around $6 million a year to credential stuffing if it's just stolen passwords being tested.
The cost is systemic. It's multifaceted. That $6 million average annual loss that the Ponemon Institute reported, that covers so much more than just the direct theft. It includes massive operational impacts, reputational damage, customer churn, and significantly higher IT support costs.
Let's break down the direct fraud component first. What's the actual black market value for one of these compromised accounts?
The cybercriminal economy has become highly specialized. So compromised financial accounts, think banking, investment platforms, major payment processors, those can fetch anywhere from, say, $30 to $120 on the dark web. It depends on the available funds and verification levels.
And what about something like a retail account?
Retail accounts like Amazon or access to loyalty point systems, those are generally priced lower, around $30. And crucially, the economy is often split. You'll have one actor who specializes in gathering the access, that's the stuffing part, and then a second actor specializes in actually committing the fraud or reselling the validated login.
So the Synthient list just made the first part of that chain much, much easier.
It dramatically lowered the barrier to entry for the gathering phase, absolutely.
And beyond the direct financial theft, you mentioned the operational impact. If an attacker is testing, say, 1 million username password pairs against a login endpoint, that volume alone must be overwhelming, even if only a tiny fraction are successful.
Precisely. Credential stuffing, just by its very nature of testing millions of pairs in rapid succession, it creates this massive synthetic flood of login traffic. This causes a denial of service, or maybe more accurately, a denial of service effect.
Right.
One major analysis estimated that on average, 16.5% of traffic hitting a login page is malicious stuffing activity.
16%. That's huge.
And in a targeted attack, that figure can shoot way, way higher. One report on credit unions showed 90% of their observed traffic was malicious. And that volume of login attempts just consumes application resources, it saturates your APIs, it overwhelms your database connections with authentication queries, and it just makes the service slow or completely unavailable for your legitimate users. And that's irrespective of whether an actual account takeover even happens. The application is just struggling under the load of validating bad credentials.
Okay, before we jump into the technical how-to of an attack, we really need to lock down the precise definition of credential stuffing, especially for analysts who are dealing with log data and trying to write incident response rules. It gets mixed up with other automated login attacks all the time.
This clarity is so crucial because if you misclassify the attack, you end up deploying a completely ineffective defense. So let's define it. Credential stuffing, CS, is the automated attack that uses username-password pairs stolen from previous unrelated breaches to access new targeted accounts. It's all about exploiting the user's habit of password reuse.
And the key differentiator there is that the credentials are known to be good, just somewhere else.
Exactly. They are known goods somewhere else.
Okay, so let's draw a really clear line. How does credential stuffing differ fundamentally from a classic brute force attack?
Brute force is it's a blind guessing game. The attacker targets a single username and then just tests many, many possible passwords against it until one works. Or more likely, the account locks out. It relies on dictionary attacks, common password lists, that kind of thing.
And that's noisy. It's easy to spot.
It's comparatively very noisy and easy to detect. It generates a high number of login failures from a single IP against a single user ID in a very short time. Your system sees that pattern, and it quickly triggers a lockout or an IP ban. Simple.
But credential stuffing operates differently, which is why it gets around those classic defenses.
Correct. Credential stuffing just elegantly flips the attack model. The attacker takes their massive combo list, like Synthient, and they test one known compromised password per user ID across many different accounts on the target system.
One password per user.
Right. If the stolen password from the cat forum works on your banking site, great. If not, the bot immediately moves on to the next unique username password pair from its list. Because the bot only tries each credential pair once, or maybe a few times, spread out over different proxies, it successfully avoids that traditional security measure that locks out an account after, say, 5 failed attempts against that single username.
This single attempt per user, that is the single biggest architectural failure point our systems have to address, isn't it?
It is the flaw that makes CS so incredibly effective. Our application logic is designed to protect the user from persistent guessing. It is not designed to protect the system from millions of valid-looking login attempts coming from millions of different IPs, each testing a unique credential pair just once.
So in the logs, it just looks like a normal failed login.
Exactly. The application logs just register a success or a single failure, which looks exactly like a legitimate user trying to log in once and mistyping their password.
And then there's password spraying. That also targets many accounts, but it's working off a different principle.
Password spraying is distinct again, yes. It uses a few incredibly common passwords like Welcome 2025 or Alpha 123, and it tries them across a massive number of users. The goal, like CS, is to avoid triggering individual user lockouts.
But it's guessing, not using known compromised data.
Exactly. Unlike CS, it relies on commonality and predictability, not confirmed breach data. CS uses the exact credential matches from huge, confirmed breach databases like Synthient. And that specificity is why CS has a reported success rate, even if it's low, say 0.1% to 4%. That makes it highly, highly efficient when you're working with a 2 billion record ammunition dump.
So here's the core weakness that analysts really need to get their heads around. Credential stuffing is not an exploit in your code base. It's not a flaw in your encryption or your input validation.
It is fundamentally a failure mode in application design. It leverages perfectly functioning application login functionality, but in high-volume, unexpected ways, and relies entirely on poor user hygiene password reuse to succeed. It leverages trust. Once the attacker has the credential, they look, functionally, exactly like a legitimate user logging in.
And that inherent deception explains why traditional web application firewalls, WEFs, and other generic perimeter defenses just often fail to stop credential stuffing when it's operating at scale.
WAFs are excellent tools, but they're for blocking overt exploits. Layer 7 attacks like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, buffer overflows. However, CS is not about exploiting a payload vulnerability. The HTTP request and the payload, the username and password, are structurally legitimate.
So a waif role looking for malicious payloads just won't see it.
It simply won't catch a valid PLT request that contains stolen but structurally correct credentials.
And even basic rate limiting rules are pretty much obsolete because of the distributed nature of the attack.
Absolutely. Attackers rely on rotating thousands and thousands of IP addresses, often sourced from these residential proxy services. This means they split the attack load. IP address A attempts user 1's login, fails, moves on. IP address B attempts user 2's login, and so on.
So no single IP ever hits the threshold.
Exactly. It prevents any single IP from hitting the threshold of a standard rate-based rule. Block an IP after 10 failures in 60 seconds. The bots mimic legitimate user behavior across this massive distributed infrastructure, and they just blend in perfectly with all the valid traffic that's hitting your login page at a normal velocity.
So the takeaway for an analyst is?
The analyst's takeaway here has to be clear. Defending against this attack requires moving beyond Layer 7 perimeter rules. You have to go to deep identity intelligence and behavioral analysis that can correlate all this distributed low-volume activity into a single malicious campaign.
All right, now we get to the technical workflow. For developers and for SecOps teams, understanding the actual mechanics of a credential stuffing attack is absolutely crucial for building the right targeted defenses. We can break this down into 3 sequential steps: acquisition and preparation, then automation and load distribution, and finally, validation and monetization.
Okay, let's start with step 1. Acquiring the fuel for the fire. The whole process begins with getting the data, which is, frankly, readily available. Attackers purchase these combo lists from dark web marketplaces. These are curated lists of username-password pairs, often grouped by domain or cleaned up for usability, just like the massive Synthient list.
Or they get them from malware.
Or they get stealer logs, which are often just dumps of credentials, cookies, and tokens harvested by endpoint malware like Redline or Azerolt on people's personal machines.
So we know the data itself isn't hard to get. These archives with billions of logins are out there. Once they have this fuel, how do they pick a target and get their tools ready?
They identify an attractive login endpoint. This could be a standard web login form, sure, but often the most vulnerable targets are mobile app APIs.
Why mobile APIs specifically?
Because mobile API endpoints frequently lack the strong, visible security challenges like a CAPTCHA, or they just don't have the same level of security scrutiny and throttling that a primary web UI gets. The authentication flow might just be a simple JSON post request that is incredibly easy to script against.
So once they have that target endpoint, they choose their weapon. Which tools are the real workhorses for this kind of large-scale automation, and what kind of technical flexibility do they give the attacker?
The tooling has evolved a lot, moving from simple command line scripts to these really dedicated, sophisticated platforms. Some key names you'll see are Sentry MBA, which was one of the earliest widespread tools. It relies on these custom configuration files called configs.
And a config file is basically the blueprint for the attack on one specific site.
Exactly. A config file precisely defines the HTTP POST request, the user agent string, all the necessary headers, the variables for username and password. It perfectly mimics a legitimate browser login to a specific website.
That level of detail is exactly what our audience needs to understand. The config file is the technical blueprint.
Precisely. And then you have the more modern successors like Snipper and, probably most importantly, OpenBullet. OpenBullet is essentially a modular, scriptable platform. It's written in C# and it offers incredible flexibility.
So what can it do that the older tools can't?
It allows the attacker to define really complex request chains. It can handle custom tokens like anti-CSRF tokens. It can manage proxy chaining, and it automates all the result parsing and error handling. It just ingests the combo list, customizes the HTTP request for the targeted application, and automates the rapid testing and result tracking. An attacker can spend hours, even days, perfecting an OpenBullet config for a single application because they know that one config can then be used to process billions of stolen credentials.
Okay, so this stem is the technical heart of the attack, masking the scale. How do they take a single config file and distribute millions of attempts so they look like low-volume, legitimate user traffic?
This part requires significant infrastructure investment and some really strategic load distribution. They distribute the load using massive botnets, or what's more common today, by paying for access to sophisticated residential proxy services.
And using residential IPs is the key here, right?
It is the key. because these IPs appear to originate from real homes, from real internet service providers, from real users. This allows the attacker to hide their true origin IP and effectively evade simple velocity checks, geofencing rules, and basic IP blacklists. If the login attempt comes from an IP address in Ohio that just accessed a weather site a few minutes ago, it looks perfectly legitimate.
So what about the client side? If they're using something like OpenBullet, what are they doing to spoof their identity beyond just rotating the IP address?
They employ some really aggressive evasion techniques. Firstly, they rely on headless browsers like customized versions of Puppeteer or dedicated command line tools or these stripped-down client emulators. This just eliminates the overhead of rendering a full graphical interface, which lets them fire off requests orders of magnitude faster than a human ever could.
But anti-bot detection systems are getting pretty good at spotting headless traffic. How do they spoof the client fingerprint to get around that?
They focus heavily on HTTP header spoofing. They'll rotate user agent strings, accept headers, encoding headers, to mimic a whole variety of common, legitimate browsers and mobile devices. And crucially, they evade basic rate limiting because they are strategic. They only try one password per user account from that proxy address before they move on.
So they completely bypass the logic designed to prevent persistent guessing against a single user.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about the final evasion technique in this step, key PTCAs. If a system is using even advanced key PCHAs, how does a highly automated system defeat them?
Key PTCHation is a mature part of the cybercrime ecosystem now. For the simpler key PCHAs, automated solver software has become highly adept at image recognition. But for systems using more complex behavioral or image-based challenges, they rely on human key PCHA farms.
Human farms.
Yes. These are services often located overseas where actual humans are paid tiny amounts of money, sometimes less than $1 per thousand solved cap TCHAs, to solve the challenges generated by the attacker's tools in real time.
So the bot just outsources the problem.
The OpenBullet configuration simply pauses the attack, sends the image to the human farm via API, receives the solution text back, and then continues the script. To the target application, the bypass appears instantaneous.
So after all that technical effort, the bot has successfully logged into an account. We are now in the account takeover, the ATO phase. What's the immediate goal?
Successful logins are immediately validated and then prioritized based on the type of monetization that's possible. The goal is rapid, automated execution of fraud. This could be making fraudulent purchases, using stored credit cards or loyalty points, exporting customer PII for identity theft,
Or just selling the working login.
or simply compiling the validated working login credentials to sell on dark web marketplaces for a premium.
The sources we looked at detailed a particularly clever post-access automation technique used in retail, the store credit loophole. This is a brilliant example of exploiting business logic, not just a technical vulnerability.
It really highlights the shift in attack thinking. So the attacker gains access to a customer's account. Using an automation framework like Puppeteer or Selenium, which can simulate full human browser interaction, they navigate to the order page.
Okay.
They might place an initial order using a stored credit card, shipping it to the customer's existing verified address. Then, they immediately cancel that order.
Why cancel it?
This is the clever part. When they cancel, they opt for a store credit refund instead of a refund back to the original credit card.
Ah, I see where this is going. Why is that store credit step so vital for the attacker?
Because that store credit is now treated as internal currency within the user's account profile. So when they immediately try to place a new order using that store credit, but this time to a new shipping address, one the attacker controls, the system often skips the standard fraud detection or reauthentication prompts that would normally be required when using an external credit card for a new address.
So the attacker leverages the system's trust in its own internal currency.
Exactly. They use it to place an order, blending the post-login activity seamlessly into legitimate refund and reorder workflows. It's an architectural fraud loop that is often only detectable via deep behavioral analysis, long after the store credit has been converted into goods and shipped to the attacker.
So we've established the threat. Enormous scale, hyper-automated, and it's exploiting user trust, not technical code vulnerabilities. The consensus among security experts is really clear on this. Perimeter defense is obsolete against this kind of threat. We need a fundamental architectural shift to zero trust at the identity layer.
Absolutely. Since the Synthient data validates that attackers will always have access to valid credentials, we have to shift our defense away from perimeter rules and exploit patching. We have to move toward behavioral intelligence and identity controls. We have 3 technical imperatives that must be implemented now to manage this risk.
Okay, so if bots can rotate residential IPs, spoof user agents, and even use human she-kept CHA farms, how can advanced detection systems reliably tell the difference between a human and a highly sophisticated bot?
The goal here has to be multi-layered. You need to identify and block the automated traffic even when it's disguised by IP rotation. Advanced bot detection systems are no longer just looking at IP addresses. They use a combination of passive and active interrogation techniques.
Okay, let's detail the technical mechanisms. What is actually involved in advanced device fingerprinting?
It starts with deep device fingerprinting. This analyzes really complex, persistent client-side telemetry. So beyond the basic browser configuration and OS versions, sophisticated systems look at things like installed font lists. A bot environment often lacks the vast array of fonts that you'd find on a typical consumer OS.
Okay, that's clever.
They also engage in canvas fingerprinting, rendering a hidden graphic in the browser and then hashing the output. Minor differences in the GPU or driver configuration result in unique hashes. And also, Web Audio API fingerprinting, which tests how the browser handles audio signal processing, and that also yields a unique digital signature.
So if an attacker is using a stripped-down headless environment, their fingerprint is just going to look weird compared to a normal user.
It will look anomalous compared to a typical consumer device, yes.
Yeah.
It reveals them as an automated entity.
But we know attackers can try to spoof those fingerprints, so what's the active interrogation piece?
Active interrogation and deception? That's the next level. Active interrogation involves testing how the client environment handles specific, computationally complex JavaScript or DOM manipulation challenges that a command line script might fail to process or just respond to atypically.
And deception.
Deception techniques include using honeypots or fake fields. These are login inputs that are invisible to human users via CSS, and they're often used just to bait bots. Any interaction, a bot trying to fill in that hidden field to mimic a human, instantly flags that visitor as malicious.
The success metrics for these systems, based on the sources, suggest this is a pretty non-negotiable investment.
Absolutely. The data speaks for itself. One vendor reported blocking over 271 million login attempts for a single customer over 17 months. Another one blocked 40 million attempts in just 2 months. These systems act as a vital mitigation layer. They effectively absorb the volume of the stuffing attacks before they can overwhelm your application logic and waste database resources on credential validation.
So relying on simple KPT-CHAs just isn't enough anymore.
It is no longer a viable primary defense. No.
Okay, imperative 2. If a password is stolen, the only truly reliable defense is multi-factor authentication, MFA. But we really have to emphasize that MFA must be enforced for all accounts, and the type of MFA you use matters immensely in the face of modern automation.
The goal is simple. Nullify the value of the stolen password. MFA must be mandatory across all your interfaces: web, mobile API, and administrative portals. Optional MFA is a massive structural security gap, and we need to prioritize phishing-resistant MFA.
Let's compare the methods. Why are traditional SMS text message codes and even basic push notifications now considered deficient against organized threats?
Because they rely on the weakest link, which is the phone number. SMS codes can be bypassed via SIM swapping, where an attacker tricks a mobile carrier into porting the victim's number to a device they control. Then they just intercept the code.
And what about push bombing?
Simple push notifications, the ones that just require a tap to approve, are susceptible to MFA fatigue or push bombing. The attacker, having successfully stuffed the credentials, just repeatedly sends push notifications to the victim's device, hoping the victim accepts one out of confusion or annoyance or just thinking it's a legitimate prompt.
So what's the technical gold standard that we should be deploying?
The gold standard is based on unphishable or at least highly resistant factors. This means physical security keys that use FIDO2 standards, like a YubiKey, and authenticator apps. That means TOTP codes or the modern number-matching push notifications.
Why is FIDO2 so much better?
FIDO2 is mathematically phishing resistant because the key uses cryptography to verify the identity of the website itself during the login. This means the second factor cannot be reused on a phishing site. It just won't work.
And what about those enhanced push notifications that require you to match a number?
Those are a huge step up from the simple accept deny. Number matching requires the user to input a specific code that's displayed on their screen into their mobile app to confirm the login. This added complexity drastically reduces the effectiveness of push bombing because the user has to actively type a number, which confirms context and intent rather than just mindlessly accepting a random push notification.
And we absolutely cannot overlook the warning about flawed implementation, like the one we saw in that OAG investigation.
That example is paramount for developers. The investigation found that over 140,000 customer accounts were compromised in CS attacks against an organization that had MFA installed. The failure was in the implementation. The MFA was bypassed or incorrectly configured, which rendered it functionally useless.
So just having it isn't enough.
Not at all. Thorough testing, auditing, and continuous monitoring of your NFA system's integration points are non-negotiable elements of your defense architecture.
All right, the third imperative. This one is about proactively eliminating the attacker's ammunition. Stop them before they even start by ensuring your customers cannot set a known bad password, including, of course, the 1.3 billion credentials from the Synthient corpus.
Exactly. The goal here is to enforce a policy that compares a customer's chosen password at signup, at a password change, or during a periodic audit against a massive library of stolen credentials. This requires integration with services like HIBP's Plow to Passwords.
But the critical technical hurdle here is always privacy. How does an organization check a customer's clear text password against billions of entries without exposing that password to a third-party API or compromising user privacy?
And this is where the technical elegance of the K-anonymity API comes in. This system is designed specifically to ensure the plaintext password is never transmitted across the network. Let me break it down step by step.
Please do.
Okay, first, the user types their password into your application's front end. Second, your application hashes that full password, usually with a strong algorithm like SHA-1. Third, your system takes only the first 5 characters of that hash. This 5-character prefix is the K&K anonymity.
So the system only transmits the first 5 characters of the hash to the HIBP service, not the full hash, not the password.
Correct. The HIBP service receives that 5-character prefix, and it looks up all the hashes in its 1.3 billion record database that start with that same prefix. It then returns a list of all the matching hash suffixes and a count of how many times those suffixes have appeared in breaches.
And because that prefix is shared by thousands of different passwords, you can't reverse engineer the original password from just the prefix. That's the anonymity part.
That's the anonymity. And then, back on your application side, your app takes that list of returned suffixes and it locally compares the full SHA-1 hash of the user's password against all the suffixes it received. If the full hash of the user's password matches any of the returned suffixes, the system knows that password is breached, and it can enforce rejection, all without ever having exposed the full password outside of the user's device or your own secure application environment.
So it's a mandatory mechanism for compliance and user trust if you want to enforce strong password policies based on this kind of global breach data.
It is. And this functionality shouldn't just be enforced at account creation, but continuously. If a user's password shows up in a new breach data set that's released next week, your system should be able to flag it immediately.
Security is a continuous process.
Absolutely. You need periodic audits of your existing user credentials against this growing list of compromised passwords. As Davey Winder noted, relying on a user-chosen password to protect your data is like buying magic beans. You have to continuously check if those beans are, in fact, confirmed bad.
Even with the best defenses in place, detection and incident response are still vital. And one of the most alarming discoveries from that OAG investigation was that several major companies were completely unaware they had been successfully targeted by credential stuffing attacks. They often just misclassified the traffic entirely.
That failure to detect a successful ATO is probably the biggest vulnerability after a stuffing attack has begun. Analysts need continuous, systematic monitoring of customer activity. Successful attacks leave very distinct footprints in the logs, even if the individual logins themselves appear valid.
So what are the specific attack signatures that technical teams should be hunting for in their SIEM and logging platforms to tell CS apart from just benign traffic?
They need to focus on behavioral heuristics and cluster analysis. Key signatures would be automated processes in the background. You should look for traffic spikes with a highly predictable mechanical sequence of API calls or actions immediately after a successful login. Look for multiple geolocation inconsistencies. One user account should not be accessing the service from 50 different countries in 1 hour. That's a huge red flag. Look for rapid atypical IP address changes associated with the same session cookie or user ID, which strongly suggest residential proxy rotation.
And what about on the device side?
Furthermore, you have to monitor user agent and device fingerprint anomalies. spikes in generic, non-standard, or known headless browser user agents. And most importantly, look for a login velocity at the account level that is low, just one attempt, but a login velocity at the application level that is astronomical. The pattern is broad, distributed failure or success, not focused, deep failure against one account.
It's crucial to reiterate the OAG's practice tip here. Personnel must not mistake credential stuffing for a simple denial of service attack.
That distinction is critical during the initial investigation phase. If your engineers treat high-volume login traffic merely as a DOS event, just a capacity issue, they will completely miss the fact that accounts are being compromised, which will lead to massive follow-on data theft.
So you need to train them on the difference.
Training staff to recognize the distinct signatures of a credential stuffing attempt, which is characterized by that high volume of unique failures or successes, versus a pure network flood or simple brute force, is absolutely essential for triggering the correct incident response protocol.
So if an attack is successful and account takeover is confirmed, the organization needs a really clear incident response mandate. The sources we looked at emphasize 4 pillars: investigation, remediation, prevention, and notice. Let's focus on the technical remediation steps right after a compromise.
When accounts are confirmed or even just reasonably likely to be compromised, remediation has to be swift and technical. Immediate actions must include mass password resets for all affected users, revoking active session tokens to immediately terminate the attacker's foothold, and freezing or suspending any accounts you suspect of financial fraud.
In a modern API-driven architecture, what does post-compromise auditing look like beyond just a simple password reset?
This is so often overlooked. Attackers often establish persistence using tokens, so analysts have to meticulously audit and revoke API tokens and refresh grants that may have been generated during the compromise period.
You have to assume they tried to create a backdoor.
You have to. If the attacker managed to use the ATO to link a malicious third-party application, you must investigate and purge any malicious integrations or connections, especially within OAuth flows. You have to investigate all downstream actions, audit payment modifications, stored data exports, any changes to linked external accounts, just to quantify the full extent of the damage. Remediation is not just about locking the front door, it's about checking for all the attacker's backdoors and persistence mechanisms.
And finally, communication. This is about managing the technical truth while trying to maintain customer trust.
Communication is the final pillar, and it's a tough one. The notification to your customers needs to be clear, precise, and technical. You have to clarify that the source of the credential leak was external. It was another unrelated service. But the threat was internal because of password reuse. This helps manage your reputation while stressing the actionable steps the customer has to take.
Like enabling MFA.
Enable mandatory, phishing-resistant MFA immediately and use unique passwords everywhere. Proactive, informed messaging based on technical facts is really the only way to retain trust after a high-profile attack, like one that's fueled by Synthient scale data. #outro.
We started this deep dive with the monumental scale of the Synthient credential stuffing threat data. 2 billion emails, 1.3 billion passwords, and 625 million of them were entirely new to researchers. The core technical takeaway here is that password reuse isn't just a nuisance, it is an existential threat to application security, because the keys to your system are being handed out by a failure in an entirely different system.
And that threat is just amplified by hyper-efficient bot automation. The tooling Sentry MBA, open bullet, residential proxies has made credential stuffing low cost, high success, and extremely difficult to detect using outdated defenses like simple DOU waves or rate limits that are so easily skirted by distributed traffic.
So defense demands an architectural shift to deep identity layer intelligence. We need advanced bot detection using technical mechanisms like Canvas and Web Audio API fingerprinting and deceptive honeypots. We absolutely must enforce phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, ditching the reliance on vulnerable SMS codes for FIDO2 or number-matching TOTP.
And we have to proactively eliminate the attacker's ammunition by integrating those anonymous breach password checks using K-anonymity across all login and registration flows.
Yeah.
We've really moved past the era of perimeter defense. Defense now requires an architectural shift from simply blocking bad traffic to intelligent, deep identity layer controls. Your users' credentials will be leaked somewhere else. Your systems had to be designed to withstand that inevitability.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the security analyst and the developer listening. Credential stuffing is an ongoing risk that evolves with every new breach dataset and every advance in automation. If your organization is relying on behavioral analytics or WAFs alone, You are not defending against a potential compromise. You are accepting an inevitable one.
So the question is, what steps can you take today?
What steps can you take today to complete the enforcement of phishing-resistant MFA across all your services, including your APIs, and to ensure breach password checks are integrated into your entire identity flow? Because that 1.3 billion consequences list is only growing, and it's already aimed at your application.
Audit your MFA implementation. Deploy those bot controls. Make the zero trust architectural shift before the next Synthient level corpus drops.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.